Awesome.
All
right, good morning. Good morning. Well, it's so good to see all of you. 2 weeks goes by so fast, doesn't it? Yeah, I feel like I was just here, and yet, you know, here we are moving around in life, and could be, Susan and I have been very busy with the ballet. So,
You're in ballet?
I should be, because all I do is drive to ballet. I don't get any of the benefits of the exercise.
Right. I know, I feel that way sometimes too. So, welcome to week 4. So if you could believe that, we're halfway through. This is the halfway point for our training and our time together. And I think what you'll find from this point forward, and even last week, you know, starting the body modules, the content gets very interesting and a little more engaging. And we're providing you with some different tools to use to stay present and have more meaningful experiences. So today's topics, we're talking about mindfulness of the body again. And underneath that category, we're talking more about the elements. These are 4 traditional elements that you can tap into inside and use as another skillful means for practice. Okay, so we'll get into that in a moment. But we're also going to be doing a little eating exercise with some interesting textures and flavors and smells. And Christine will be leading us through that. And then lastly, we'll be talking more about walking meditation and using the walking meditations as another way to drop into presence and abundance and being more mindful of your environment. So we'll get started. Are there any questions from last week before we do that, or any comments, anything you want to share?
I do have a question. So if you are sort of changing, do you think it's bad if like you try sort of something different every day? So sometimes, you know, I'm just doing the traditional, like sitting there. Then if I stand, do you think it still is enough continuity?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, especially.
Should I just stick with one thing?
Right. I think especially in the beginning, it's really important to try different things and see what's resonating and what maybe could be more challenging, where you feel more kind of plugged in, right? And just really noticing. Journaling really helps with those experiences. So just even taking 5 minutes and, you know, adding some comments, free writing about it. Because the journal provides a resource that you can go back to and say, wow, this has changed quite a bit for me. This experience has changed quite a bit. And then I think eventually at least in my experience, which is all I could speak to really, is you find these anchor practices that really help sustain this mindful presence and mindful awareness. And you'll notice that they become more of a refuge, right? So they become a practice that you really prioritize and you kind of run to in a day. And then there'll be these other practices that you know you need, right? That are really important, but maybe they're a little more challenging, right? And so you might find yourself avoiding them a little. Like I do that a little with the concentration practices, especially shamatha, when I'm working with visualizations, so on and so forth. But when I find myself really disconnected to my task-oriented daily, life, right? If I feel like I'm too far away from center, if I notice that I'm multitasking and not getting anything actually finished, right? I know that I need to work on my concentration practices because they'll really help focus me and provide that steadiness, that gathered noticing, right? So I'll avoid them because I like this more spacious awareness practice or Vipassana practices, which you guys really haven't been exposed to as of yet. We'll be getting into that. So those are my favorite practices, but I really need the shamatha practices, right? Yeah. I really need the metta practices, the compassion practices. But those 2 are ones that I don't necessarily avoid, but sometimes just don't prioritize in the same way, right? So definitely in the beginning, trying everything, you know, even day to day, as long as you're carving away that formal practice time, it's meaningful time, right? Good question. All right, so let's have a short practice. Let's all stand today. And just step your feet out, hips distance apart. Good, if you want to take a moment to kick off your shoes or heels, you certainly can. So that grounding presence sometimes could be really important.
That'll take me a minute.
Yeah, take your moment, take your moment. Yeah, especially with heels, sometimes it makes us feel unsteady.
Last time I took mine off and never put them back on.
Good for you.
All day.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing. So good for your feet. All right, so grounding your feet, hips distance apart. And you could either take your hands right to your belly or take them behind you, right? Or you could just rest them on your belly if that feels comfortable. And then you could either keep your eyes open and the gaze down, just softening your gaze, or you could close your eyes if that feels comfortable. So just taking a moment to land here together, noticing your body standing, bringing your attention to center. Noticing your tall, noble, dignified spine, fully supported. Now bring your attention to your feet. Notice the distribution of weight in your feet. You could even gently rock front to back. You could rock side to side. Just taking a moment to find this center in your feet and a grounding sensation there, where you feel really planted down, rooted into the earth. You could even imagine these roots, like roots of a tree growing out of the feet and anchoring you even deeper down, finding more steadiness there, more stability. And with this grounding energy, see if you could even find more spaciousness in the spine at center. You could imagine the crown of the head reaching up towards the sky. And then bring your attention to your heart space. Notice that gentle lift up through the sternum, the front body, lifting gently. And notice how that creates even a little more space at center, just that gentle lift. And see if you can encourage the shoulders to open, to broaden, the collarbone to open and expand, and the shoulders to gently drop back and down. Now just bring your attention to your breath, noticing how it is right now, moving in and out. Feeling grounded, centered, and open for this experience together today. Letting any other thoughts or distractions just simply dissolve. And we'll just bring our hands to heart center, the right hand on your heart and the left hand over the right. And just take a bow to center, offering gratitude for this time together today. Gratitude for this possibility of feeling more grounded and open with full attention. And we'll join the room together again. How are you guys feeling? Right? That practice is so beautiful and important, and it doesn't have to be that long, remember. So you could have a seat, but we could use that centered, grounded, open practice just in under a minute, right? Especially if we're moving quickly through the day. You're here in the office together, and you may be really entrenched in your work and then have to completely shift gears into something that's equally as important. And if we just take 30 seconds to a minute to just pause and notice the breath and come into our bodies and kind of root down into what's happening right now, we could re-enter this new space, or enter the new space with this open, kind of courageous, confident energy that can really be felt, right? It's totally different than running from one experience to the next and kind of feeling less connected. So it's all about the pause. It's all about finding that moment where we could just reconnect to ourselves. So the elements are a great way to do that, right? We talked about this interconnectedness that the practice offers, right? When we start dropping into ourselves, we start experiencing life exactly how it is, without this need to change things, change any circumstance. We had a picnic yesterday after the final show, and the weather was really unpredictable, and I found myself yesterday morning feeling really anxious about how the day was going to unfold. And I was able just to catch myself in that moment and just let it be so, right? So how much energy could have been wasted worrying about whatever could happen? Would it rain? Would I have 50 people in the house? Would I have wet children moving around? And at one point during the day, it did rain, and that's exactly what happened. But you know what? It was so beautiful to experience anyway. And really, what does it matter if there's some drips and drops all along the floor? The kids were having a blast, and everybody was enjoying themselves. And that energy really has to come from whoever's hosting the experience, right? Because if I would have been frazzled and worried and disturbed by how things were unfolding, everyone else would have picked up on that and felt stressed, right? So I just tried to embrace life just as it was, and it was fine. A little extra cleaning up, but who cares?
Sorry.
Right? It was a great day. But the elements that we're talking about today are traditional elements found in Eastern cultures. And we know through these Tibetan teachings that there's 4 elements that are found not only in nature surrounding us, but we can also tap into those elements inside of us. So these elements practices are so wonderful when we especially feel distracted or overwhelmed, right? Because it gives us another way to tap in to what's here, what's already here, without feeling maybe distracted by the breath not being as we want it to be, right? Perhaps some of you have been dealing with allergies. Anybody with some of the pollen going on? Right. Asthma. I've been feeling my asthma flare up here and there. And so sometimes that could be difficult to work with, right? Whatever's here right now, especially when it's out of our control. So I find that I tap into these element practices, the metta practices, when my breath doesn't feel comfortable, when it does feel overwhelming or frustrating, right? And then I have these other means to just drop in. So what are the elements? What are we talking about today? So any guesses?
Water.
Yes,
Okay.
water. Anybody else?
Fire.
Fire,
Wind.
wind.
I'm thinking Avatar.
Yeah, something like
Yes,
that.
it's very Avatar.
Ice or cold or something like that.
No,
The earth.
earth. Yeah, that grounding earth energy, right? What we just talked about, that earth energy really grounds us. And we're gonna start with air, wind, right? Air or winds, they're kind of interchangeable. But what I like to do is think of myself. Last year we went to, I'm just gonna grab the chair. My husband and I had a trip planned to Hawaii. And we had it planned for over a year. It was like a combined work and family trip, right? And it ended up happening at the perfect time and the most inconvenient time, as often these things go when we plan that far ahead. But it was, excuse me, it was right after the death of my grandmother. So we had just been through this really intense, couple of months, spending a lot of time in hospitals and then in the nursing home, and then ultimately back at my grandmother's home where I spent most of my time growing up with hospice care. And so it was like this long drawn out process, which I'm sure many of you have experienced yourself. And this vacation was about 6 weeks after she passed. And so I was really deeply grieving. And even though I was rather disconnected from my normal formal daily practices, I had never felt more present and more aware and more mindful in my entire life, because I was so tapped in to just being with her at the end of her life and in a full-hearted way. But obviously it was really depleting energetically. So I was kind of recovering from everything. And, really struggling with some of my practices because I was just feeling the grief in my body, just that heaviness and that aching heart space. So when we got to Hawaii, I went out by myself to the beach in the mornings to practice. And every time I drop into my breath, I'd feel the heaviness of my heart. But what I was able to tap into were the elements because I was surrounded in them, right? Just the heat from the sun, the fire energy, the grounding of the earth beneath me sitting in the sand, the water swirling and crashing before me. It was just so beautiful and intense. And it really dropped me into these practices in such a felt way. And I really experienced the power of just being in the elements, welcoming them from the outside, and noticing what the elements feel like from the inside. So I'd like to kind of lead you through that today, right? So sit up nice and tall and uncross your legs. Good, and just bring your hands down onto your knees in a non-grasping, relaxed way. And just drop into your body for a moment. And just noticing this space around us, this space that's hosting all of us in the room today. Feeling supported here in the seat and under your feet. But I'd like you to just imagine yourself sitting in this tropical space with me, this visualization of being in Hawaii, sitting on the sand. And see if you could imagine the cool breeze against your skin. Feeling the wind, hearing it. Imagine what it would sound like in the quiet of the morning. And as you welcome this experience of noticing the air around you, imagining this tropical breeze, see if you can just look within and notice the wind energy moving in and out. The body breathing itself, whether or not we're paying attention. And notice how with each breath in and each breath out, we're not only experiencing air or wind energy in the act of breathing, but we could feel this air energy or spaciousness throughout the entire body. So where else can you feel wind energy inside? The element of air offers a lightness and freedom. In that lightness is possibility and space. And staying with this visualization of sitting on the warm sand, see if you could drop down into this visualization of the warm sand beneath you, supporting you. Imagine your bones just sinking and settling there. And the earth herself holding you. Notice how the support of the earth, that earth energy, not only supports you physically, but how we could ground down into that element emotionally. And notice how the earth element balances out the air element inside of you. So we feel that lightness of air, and we also feel that solid foundation of the physical body, of our bones, and now staying with that visualization on the warm sand, see if you could experience the heat of the warm sun surrounding you, warming you. And where can you feel that fire energy, that heat inside? Imagine the heat of the heart energy, your passion, what drives you, how the heat of anger or agitation can really propel you forward. How that heart space full of love and compassion can fill us with courage. Notice where else you feel heat or fire inside of you. And now imagine the waves crashing in front of you and noticing that you're surrounded by the element of water. Noticing the energy of the water element surrounding you and also inside of you. Notice the moisture inside of your mouth and swallow it down into your belly. And notice how the water element inside can cool the fire of the heart. The water element washing you clean. Also connected with our breath. We could imagine the element of water as the breath bathes us, refreshing and cooling wherever we need it inside. Now see if you could just notice all the elements as they are right now. And imagine this beautiful balance of energy inside between air and earth, fire and water. Always present, always available, opening us to our surroundings and each other. Just bring your right hand on heart center, your left hand over your right. Take a deep breath in. Exhale, empty the breath. And just bow the head and open the eyes. How are you all feeling? Relaxed. Yeah. But we could use those elements any way that we feel connected with them, because we could experience the elements in a really personal way inside our own bodies. We could experience the elements in nature. That's why we feel peaceful when we're in nature. Our systems really need the elements to stay balanced. And we could really tell when one of the elements are out of balance inside. So when we tap into these visualizations, even if they feel a little hokey or make-believe at first, they could tap us into whatever's happening inside. And we start noticing the body communicating in different ways, right? So how many times have you felt heat in your shoulder or your low back, right? That's the body's way of communicating pain or discomfort. Right? We could feel the elements, and instead of reacting or protecting, a space inside that might need attention, we could drop into our bodies just as it is and look inside, noticing what element's there, and imagine that opposite element kind of bringing that space into balance. Okay, so Chinese medicine is very much associated with the elements, and we'll use these practices as we go along, right? Some of the kidney practices, for instance, that we talked about last time in the yin yoga practice are very cooling for the body, right? The kidneys are associated with the element of water. The lungs are associated with the element of air, the spleen with the earth, and the heart with fire. Right? So when we go in to see an acupuncturist, for instance, they'll be really interested in your wind energy, right? And balancing that. Very interested in the water element and taking care of the kidneys and the practices. So all different ways of tapping in, but we could do this in our daily formal practice as another alternative, as a means to see what's here right now. Okay. What questions do you have just on the elements? Any? Was that helpful for you? Awesome. We're going to talk about mindful eating, and you're going to have an experience, and then we'll bring it together at the end. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Christine, and she's going to head over here. I'll be passing out a plate for each of you.
This is
You're
the
welcome.
fun part.
This is fun.
So I'll just go ahead and get started. Long before I knew that I was teaching mindfulness of eating, I was teaching mindfulness of eating. This was probably about 20 years ago when I was working with anorexic and bulimic women who were leaving hospitalization and coming back into their lives. And part of my work with them was teaching them how to eat again, but to eat in ways that did not inspire anxiety, stress, and overwhelm. So you might imagine how important these kinds of practices would be so that they could create a new relationship to food that was free of stress, overwhelm, and anxiety. Because the way that they were thinking about food was in terms of their past. You know, if I get involved with food again, what's going to happen? Is it going to land me in the same place, which is hospitalization? And then also worries about the future. What is this going to do to my weight? Is this going to change things? How am I going to feel physically after ingesting this? Am I going to feel the need to run to the treadmill or to purge, right? So my goal was, how do I get them to experience food stress-free, which was really bringing them into the present moment, right? And when we think about how we eat all day long, you know, when we're eating on the run, you know, we're really eating as a means to an end, as opposed to taking that pause and really being aware of what we're taking in. I know that when I started to practice mindful eating in a really intentional way, which is not all the time, by the way, right? In an intentional way, I eat very differently. I don't eat as much because everything has been slowed right down. And it becomes a very sensual experience, not sexual, sensual, meaning it engages my five senses. So I want to take you through an experience, and we won't have time to explore all of these foods. We're going to actually use the orange for this experience. And there are a couple of different parts to this. There's actually 3 parts. One is we're going to begin, and this kind of takes us back to a few weeks ago when we talked about that practice of preciousness. Right? When I can focus on the preciousness of this orange that I'm holding in my hand, and the fact that it's actually here and in my hand, it's very natural then to go to gratitude. And what do we know about gratitude? I mean, really try this. You cannot hold thoughts of stress, worry, and overwhelm and negativity in the same mind where there's gratitude. So we begin with gratitude, and then we're going to move into how to engage the five senses related to food. Because here's another tip. Try to engage fully more than one of your senses at the same time. It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to fully engage my sense of vision with my sense of smell. You can try it, but your attention will be split. So when we just work with the five senses, it's a very quick pathway into present moment awareness. Okay, so that's yet another tool. And I think at this point in the training, you know, what we're hoping is that you're taking everything that you know so far about mindfulness and starting to see it show up in all areas of your life. Okay, and then we'll come back right at the very end to gratitude. All right, so Jen and I communicated this morning about my leading this part of our time together today, and I very quickly made some notes, because one of the things I do when I'm intentional about mindful eating is I always begin by just taking a moment, a pause, and kind of looking at the food that is in front of me, and I go into a gratitude practice. All right, so we're gonna begin with the orange, but before we do that, I'd like for you to just close your eyes and, you know, sort of settle into whatever bodily posture sort of feels most comfortable for you at this point to launch into this present moment awareness. And I just want you to listen to these words. I am grateful that I have the privilege to have this food before me. I am grateful for the nurturing earth from which this food was birthed, for the sun, the rain, the soil, and the terrain from which the elements of this food grew. I am grateful for the hands that harvested it, transported it, prepared it, the hands that brought it here to me now. Grateful for all the ways that this food will nourish and sustain me, energize and heal me, delight and fascinate me. And I hold sincere wishes that all beings will come to be nourished in this way, just as I am, here and now. So gently open your eyes, and I just want you to take this orange into your hands and really focus in on vision, what you see, the various colors that are here, the fact that this is not perfectly round, that there's this sticker on the side, right? Just everything about this that your vision is drawn to. And then just moving into touch and what the texture of this is like, and maybe the weight. Maybe using both your fingers, fingertips, and your hands to just really notice how this feels against your skin. And then just as it is, taking this to your nose. And just inhaling and just noticing what you smell. And then whenever you're ready, you're actually going to start to peel this. And as you're peeling, again, noticing, what do I see? Right now, I start to see the meat of this orange, the white of the skin beneath the skin, and also the sensation of actually peeling this, how this feels different from the act of holding it. And then if you would take a piece of skin and then just smell the inside, the white, which is infinitely different than what you smelled on the outside. And then if you take your two fingertips and rub this together, this is how you can derive the actual oil from the orange. When people use things like essential oil of orange, they think it's the actual orange. It's actually derived from the skin. And that scent is different from the white and different from the outer side. And then if you can, peeling into the actual meat of the orange. And getting a slice. And again, and as you come here, again, you use all these senses. What does this look like? You know, did you ever notice what appears to be these white veins that run throughout this orange, and how this feels and how this smells? And then finally, how this tastes, and putting it into the mouth. And so when we eat mindfully and we bring the food to the mouth, we become aware of texture. And we're encouraged to chew and to chew and to chew before actually swallowing. So if you can chew to the degree that this becomes liquid in the mouth before swallowing, and noticing how food tastes differently upon entering the mouth, and then when it's transformed into just its natural juices, the taste is yet different again. Okay. I'm just doing that a few times. And then the other sense that you can engage as you're doing this is, as I'm peeling the orange, how did that sound, you know? How did it sound to first pull away the outer skin? What is the sound associated with taking these pieces apart? What is the sound that I hear inside, internally, as I'm chewing? Right. Any observations?
Never thought about what you said about how the taste changes, like, depending on when you put it in your mouth compared to when you chew it. So I've been kind of thinking about that, and you're right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So when we do mindful eating, the recommendation is to chew something a minimum of 30 times. And when you think about, first of all, strictly from a physical standpoint and a health standpoint, it makes it much easier for your body to assimilate if you have chewed that much, and it really slows you down, right? Because when you think about, have you ever had an experience where you think, I just inhaled that? I'm not even sure that I chewed that meal, and the kind of gastrointestinal distress that can emerge from that. So now chewing 30 times, that takes you into an entirely different level of mindfulness, where now you're sort of counting and having that experience. But yeah, the taste does change. Mm-hmm. Anything else? Other observations?
I think just how quickly I eat. When you take the time, I would be done with 2 oranges by now.
Yeah.
But that's,
Yeah, you start to really notice pace and speed. And the introductory words that I spoke, and when Jen asked me this morning what I want to teach this segment, the first thing I thought of was, what do I do when I'm mindfully eating? And the first thing I do is some form of this, and I wrote this up this morning. I do some form of this, which is, gratitude for where this came from. And I don't know where do you know where these oranges came from?
I do not.
Beyond
They are
Wegmans.
Price Chopper
Yeah.
in the organic section.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, what earth, where did these come from? What tree did this grow from? What earth supported it? What soil? What sun? What rain? Who picked this? Who packed this? Who transported it? Who put it out on the shelves? Who brought it here? Jennifer brought it here. These are the hands that brought what is before me here. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the fact that I have this orange in front of me in the first place. I was on a mindful eating date Saturday night, and that's what we did. We were in this beautiful restaurant, and that was the intention, was we're going to have a mindful eating date every step of this process, which began with wine drinking. Right? Think about, you're on your 2nd or 3rd glass of wine and you're thinking, I'm on my 3rd glass of wine. What happened to the previous 2? What happens when you slow all that down? And you see people who drink wine, who are connoisseurs of wine, really taking their time. What do they do first? Yeah, they kind of roll it around and
First thing to do is look at it.
got it.
Smell for it. Look at the oils.
Yeah.
Sense the oils.
Do you do that?
I do.
Yeah. So
Usually not with Mondavi, but yeah.
but then that of this. That's
Right.
Mindfulness, right?
Yeah.
So, and then the taste of the wine at different stages of actually ingesting it is different.
Mhm.
Right? That's just an example. But when you slow everything down like that, you're so aware when a plate of food is placed before me at a restaurant. Look how beautiful it was arranged in this case that I'm speaking of Saturday night. It looked like art. It looked like artwork, and as opposed to just launching in, right? Slowing everything down. So it always helps me when I remember when there is a plate of food in front of me, or a cup of tea in front of me, or a glass of wine in front of me, to stop into or drop into that gratitude. Where did this come from? How is it that it's here? I'm so grateful that it's here. And the end of this prayer was, and my sincere wish is that all beings would come to have this experience of this kind of abundance and plenitude. And then eating becomes totally different. Totally different. Okay. So 3 things. Just starting with that pause of gratitude. You don't have to go through this long thing that I just read to you, right? But just sort of, where'd this come from? Who are the hands that touched it? So glad that it's here, that I have the privilege to eat it. Wishing this for all others. And then use the 5 senses as your touch points. What does this look like? What does this feel like? What does this sound like? What does this taste like? What does this smell like? That's mindful eating or mindful drinking. So we're at 10:25.
Yes.
I'm going to, you've got 2 other items here that you can practice with later. And I want you to do the same thing. you know, and this can take as long as you'd like or as brief as you like. And what's great about the chocolate is it's dark chocolate, it's salted, and there's caramel. So there's a lot of
It's
things.
like perfect food.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of things going on here. Right. And, you know, I started with sort of like an extreme story about how I've used this practice with people, but a lighter story is leading mindful eating with kids, you know, and using something very, like they love tangerines, those little tangelos or clementines, a marshmallow, and then a chocolate that's got a lot going on. And kids will say, I never realized that when I break a piece of chocolate, it makes that snapping sound, or the sound of the unwrapping, or the idea that I taste sugar, I taste salt, right? Oh, it's really smooth, or you know, the texture of this is like, think about your favorite foods. I'll have people say, I hate tapioca pudding, right? Or I hate rice pudding because of what?
Texture.
The weird texture. Whereas I love those because of the texture. So how that there are some foods that we're really drawn to because their texture appeals to us or their texture doesn't appeal to us. But just this awareness. And I think increasingly you'll find as we move through from this module into the other modules is that there are all these opportunities. You have your formal practice, but there are all these opportunities all day long to be mindful. And it changes everything. Okay. All right. Well, enjoy your chocolate and your marshmallow and finish your orange if you want to.
So, quick question. for you.
Yeah.
I mean, outside of, let's say, extreme issues, is sort of the way that we consume food in America, which is, I think, probably, you know, shove as many calories in your mouth as quickly as you can and then move on to the next thing. Is that sort of an additive to the day-to-day stresses,
Yes.
the way it affects your body and stuff like that?
Absolutely. It's almost violent, you know, the way that we can somehow bring it in so quickly. And it's not good for the system to do that. Our systems aren't designed to take it in that way. I mean, our systems are designed to take food in as nourishment, as fuel, as something to support our well-being. Because we know about the body. I mean, cut yourself, the first thing that happens is you bleed and a scab starts to develop really quickly. Our bodies are designed to heal. They want to heal. And we're in the way of that, you know? And so anything that we're doing that isn't aligned with how our bodies really want to operate interferes with our healing. And I haven't spent a lot of time abroad, but from what I know and understand, especially in European countries, when you think about the ritual of eating, you know, I remember having Portuguese roommates when I was in graduate school. And every day at about 4 p.m., they had warm bread. They made toast with butter and jam, not margarine, real butter and jam, and really good coffee. And no matter how busy our days were, that was what happened at 4 o'clock. And dinner was at 7 or 8, and was always with a glass of beautiful wine. And we sat around the table and we ate very, very slowly. And I learned a lot from that. You know, eating was a mindful act that encouraged connection. So I think that there's something about the way we eat in America, especially, that deprives us, takes us away from these mindful states, which really are our natural state. Does that answer? Yeah. Do you feel the same?
But we all do it.
We all do
Right.
it. Yeah, I had the experience yesterday where I thought, did I eat lunch today? Because moving, and I'm like, did I forget, did I have lunch?
Right. And food does have the capacity to bring us in and tune us into the elements in a different way, right? So we can feel the elements in the food and the way our body's digesting and absorbing nutrients, right? We can start feeling it inside. Anything that takes us into overwhelm is something we really want to notice. It's about paying attention, right? So whether that's food or heat, for instance, fire energy can take us into overwhelm rather quickly, right? We want to pay attention to what's happening and we want to try to balance it out. Okay, so it's all about paying attention, all of these practices. That's what mindfulness really is if we boil it down to. And it changes everything, right? It makes every experience more meaningful. There's a potential for meaningful connection in each experience, in every moment. Right? We just have to be willing to open to it. Right? It's already there. So if we just trust it, that opportunity becomes really abundant. Yeah.
I heard something the other day that I did not know, and that is that if you took the word mindfulness and the translation of it in Pali, language Pali, is remembering or to remember. And I thought, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I practice mindfulness every time I remember to approach this orange just as we did. Every time I remember, you know, as I was walking over here, it was really windy. And I was very aware of how cold the wind felt. And my mind wanted to go to, it's June. Why is it so cold? Like just this, right? And I was like, no, this is how the wind feels today. And an opportunity to connect to the air element.
Mm-hmm.
How am I really aware of the air element right now and how it feels? And then I get here and I didn't have to go down the pathway of I hate this. This doesn't feel good to me. It's about something I can't do anything about anyway.
Right. So lastly, just to wrap things up, because this is a really full session, I'd like you to try to eat mindfully at least 3 to 5 times in the next 2 weeks. And feel free to include this practice. Include your families and friends in this practice. I would really challenge you to have a mindful meal, invite somebody over who knows nothing about mindfulness, and invite them into that experience, just like Christine said, her mindful date, which I can't wait to hear about. But one more thing to add to it, try also a mindful eating experience on your own in silence. So not in front of the television, especially. Also no music, perhaps even eating outside, right? Just taking a moment, sitting down, not standing up. I have a really bad habit of doing that.
Checking text messages while you're,
Yeah, no computer, no phone, right? And just enjoy your food in a mindful way. Changes everything. You'll be really surprised at how much less food you need when you eat mindfully, when you're really enjoying it, when you're eating slower. You'll notice when you're full. You'll notice when you're hungry, right? Sometimes we don't even know what it feels like to feel hungry. So wait to eat until you start feeling like you're ready. I ignore times during the day. I really do try to tune in to when my body needs to eat, you know, and I try to make that a practice for my kids too, as much as possible, right? So that could be a formal practice. It could be an informal practice. We're still working into our formal practices. We've been working with the breath as the anchor. You could now work with the body as the anchor, working with sensation, working with the elements inside, right? Starting to understand and tune in to how that meal feels right now, digesting. What foods are healing you and what foods are harming you. Food allergies are a big problem for Americans today because of the amount of pesticides in our crops, right? It's a bit directly linked to that. In your supportive email that I'm sending you, there's some documentaries on the slow food movement, on organic farming, on CSAs. I'd encourage you to tap into as many of those as you can, right? There's tons of resources out there. We have local CSAs, community supported agriculture, within our own community. They're nutrient dense vegetables and fruits that are offered locally and in an organic farming practices where the soil is nurtured, right? So there's a lot of information in that email. I hope you find it really helpful. Feel free to reach out at any time with any questions. Our next session will be moving into mindfulness of feelings, but we'll continue this conversation, right? Because it's really important.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, thank you. Yeah, I look forward to next time.
Good, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You know, you actually don't have to put your shoes back on.
I was thinking about